The Dallas Stars are looking to get back to their winning ways here in round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs as they take on the Seattle Kraken tonight in game 2 of this best of 7 series. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about Jason Robertson and when we can expect him to finally explode offensively in the postseason. We'll talk about Joe Pavelski and whether or not he should stay on the second line or move back to his original line. And then we'll also talk about Jake Oettinger, as he's been drawing some pretty big comparisons from some notable NHL media members. All of this coming up on a Thursday episode of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, coming to you on this Thursday, May 4th. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by and making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day. Remember to hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform of choice. We're always free and available no matter where or how you choose to listen. Thank you for being an everydayer of this episode of this show, as we like to say around here, as we gear up for Game 2 of the Stars and Kraken second round series, actually, after the Stars lose in overtime in Game 1. But obviously, a lot of big storylines coming from that game. Joe Pavelski with 4 goals in his return, but also a not so great one on the Stars side of things, and that is Jason Robertson, who really felt like a non-factor in Game 1 against the Kraken. Only 3 shots on goal. He recorded 3 giveaways, according to NHL.com, with all 19 minutes of on-ice time, 18 minutes and 56 seconds of time on ice for Jason Robertson in this game. Nearly 2 minutes of time on the power play, which with only 2 power play opportunities is to be expected. But there were stretches of the first round where it felt like Jason Robertson wasn't really involved to the extent that he could have been or that we would have liked to have seen. And it seems that it's starting to carry over into this series as well. He is sitting at a point per game right now here in this playoffs, which isn't bad. He certainly has been contributing at times, but you would expect more from the first guy in Dallas Stars franchise history to score 100 points in a season. And the matter of fact is he absolutely needs to take over this series. He's 9th on the team in high danger chances for, with only 4 at all strengths, 5 on 5, and on the power play. 5th on the team in expected goals, which is promising at 1.92, but even if he's getting those expected goals or those scoring chances, those scoring opportunities, he hasn't been able to execute. And he's only scored twice this series, and both of them have been on the power play, which is fine. But we also do need to see him contribute to the offense at a 5-on-5 capacity. Otherwise, this team is just not the same, and they don't pose the same threat night in and night out if they're not getting that solid, consistent production from Jason Robertson, especially at this point in the season where it's the playoffs and every game, every shift, seemingly every second matters that he's out there on the ice. And we've seen Jason Robertson enter into these scoring slumps before, especially during this past regular season. From December 6th to January 4th, he only scored 3 goals. That was only 3 goals in a span of 15 games. And really, if you go and look at his game logs, I was just looking at the ones on NHL.com, you can see that he'll kind of have those dry spells where he's, not scoring goals. He's still picking up points here and there, getting assists and things like that, but he's not scoring. And that's really what he does best, is score goals. And that's pretty clear, having done it, 80 plus times over the past 2 seasons. And really, I think there's reason for hope, because you look at those cold spells, and then typically after he breaks out of those, he tends to string together some pretty impressive performances, some multi-goal games, or at least, 2-3 game goal streaks. And we really need to see that. But I mean, we keep saying it, and there's going to come a point where you can't just keep saying, well, he's due, he's going to break out at some point. Eventually, we need to see those results. Otherwise, things are going to get very concerning pretty quickly for the Stars. I mean, they do have other guys that have stepped up in his place. Pavelski, Hintz, Seguin, but you just really expect to see more than just 1 point per game from Jason Robertson, which, again, isn't awful. I'm not saying that he's been completely irrelevant here in the postseason, but a guy who's likely going to draw a few Hart Trophy votes, well, I think he should at least. You would expect him to be performing to a higher standard in the Stanley Cup playoffs, 14 games into his playoff career. And I know that some of the things aren't necessarily in his control. The defense in Minnesota was swarming him and making things difficult for him, and that opened up the floor for guys like Roope Hintz and Tyler Seguin. And Seattle, you have to imagine, is going to continue to try to keep that up. But eventually you have to devise some sort of game plan or figure something out from a coaching perspective and even a player perspective where you can find ways to get him open, because the best players don't just draw the attention of the defense and roll over. The best players and the best teams and the best coaches find ways to adjust and continue to set up their best players for success despite the efforts of the defense on the opposition, which Seattle does have some decent defensemen, and their forwards play fine defensive play too, but I really don't think it's on paper as challenging of a defense as Minnesota. Of course, we know Seattle showed in game one that they are not afraid to lay some big hits and play physical, but I still don't think that that's a reason for Jason Robertson to play a non-factor in this series. And I am hopeful, I'm optimistic that he is eventually going to have that breakout performance, because history has shown us early in Robo's career that he'll have these stretches where he goes a while without a goal. But then once he finally does start scoring, he's one of the hardest guys to stop out there on the ice. But I mean, the Stars can't wait around until the middle of this series or the end of this series. They need him to start contributing right now. And that's going to be what's best for this team if you add him into the mix of the other players that have stepped up and performed at a very, very high level. And it's weird. I feel like up to this point, even though their numbers, Robertson might have more points and more goals, Wyatt Johnston, I feel like at sometimes has outplayed Jason Robertson in these playoffs. I mean, you watch what he did at the end of game one, near the end of regulation. Wyatt Johnston, it was almost just a one-man wrecking crew, and he came oh so close to scoring multiple times at the end of that game. And hopefully seeing performances like that from his teammates continues to fire him up. We know that Jason Robertson's not one who's just going to back down and quit. He's going to find his game eventually. But with where the Stars are at, things are only going to get more difficult and more challenging as the playoffs continue to go on. If the Stars are able to advance past this round, you definitely need him if you're going to take on the Vegas Golden Knights, or especially the Edmonton Oilers, because you just know that their offensive weapons, McDavid and Draisaitl, they're not going to be non-factors in that series. They are going to be the catalyst for offense for the Oilers in that series, if it does happen. Getting a little ahead of myself there with both of those series, only one game completed in each. But that's really just the reality of all of it. Jason Robertson, excellent regular season. He's done fine here in the playoffs, but fine isn't going to cut it for a player of his caliber. And I don't say it to tear down Jason Robertson or say he's a bad player. And I know many of you share the sentiment as well. I think we just have high standards for him, and we have high standards for this team. This isn't just a season where it's, we made it past the first round. That's a successful season. I mean, it's a Cup Finals appearance or bust this season, the way I see it, just given who's on this team, the veteran leadership, the coach that gets brought in, the fact that, Joe Pavelski sticking around for another season after this. I mean, that gives you an idea of how everyone on this roster feels, that this is a Stanley Cup Finals appearance or it's a lost season. And that's the reality of it. And you need your best players to step up to make sure that you can reach that final destination. Well, there's certainly some solutions that could be out there that have been thrown around on social media, as well as just in my own mind, talking about how maybe the lineup could be readjusted. Joe Pavelski's back. He wasn't playing with Roope Hintz and Jason Robertson, though. He was playing with Max Domi and Mason Marchment. Should that continue to be the case, or should Pete DeBoer and his coaching staff reunite the top line? We'll talk about that here in just a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. Are you looking for a delicious snack but don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar ever. If you're like me, you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste. Well, I've got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Bar Puffs. These bars are healthy and taste amazing. They taste so amazing that you won't think they're actually good for you, but they are. And what makes them taste so good, you might ask? Well, for starters, Built Bars are covered in 100% real dark chocolate, and they come in unbelievably delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. And I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. Only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait to get your own box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, and you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. Doesn't really matter how you get them. Just make sure you give a try to Built Bars, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all the everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday during this Stanley Cup playoff run. The Stars and the Kraken set to participate in Game 2 tonight at the AAC. And I'm curious to see what the lineup looks like because, as we know, Joe Pavelski is back. He's reunited with the team. He returned to the lineup, but he was not reunited with his old line mates, Roope Hintz and Jason Robertson. He played right wing on a line with Max Domi at center and Mason Marchment on the left wing. And you could say he did pretty well in his return, having not played in 2 weeks. He scored 4 goals on 6 shots. And so that begs the question, does Joe Pavelski stay on that second line with Mason Marchment and Max Domi? Or should he and Tyler Seguin swap places and you reunite the Avengers line or the Pavelski and Sons line, whatever you want to call it? Do you reunite arguably the best line in hockey? And I think that there's value to both stances. I'm sure that there's some discourse on what should be done amongst the fan base as well as amongst the coaching staff as well. I'm sure that there might be some valid points being brought up on both sides of the argument. But I feel like as of right now, I would not be opposed to seeing Joe Pavelski stay alongside Max Domi and Mason Marchment. Obviously, reuniting Pavelski with Hintz and Robertson would elevate his game even more. It would potentially even elevate Jason Robertson's game. But I still think that there's more to gain for the team in its entirety if you keep Pavelski on the second line, at least for the foreseeable future. And, maybe you can still make some adjustments down the road, because mainly my concern lies with Tyler Seguin. I think keeping Pavelski with Domi and Marchment allows him to continue to play at a high level. And he seems to, it's one game, it's a small sample size. But Max Domi has played pretty well throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs. Mason Marchment is starting to string together some good games in the latter stages of that Minnesota series. And then, of course, here in Game 1 against the Kraken, he picks up an assist. And I think that playing anyone that plays alongside Joe Pavelski is going to benefit from it and be a better hockey player because of Joe Pavelski's IQ, his playmaking ability, his ability to get his stick on the puck and deflect those shots or help create those rebound opportunities. Anyone that plays alongside him is going to benefit and likely reap the rewards statistically, but also the team as a whole is going to benefit on the score sheet. Whereas, Tyler Seguin, who's had a good postseason, while there has been some, success with him paired with Domi and Marchment, is that really going to be as effective as having Joe Pavelski on that line? Because again, there's no argument to be made about that top line. You put Pavelski with Hintz and Robertson, they're going to continue to play well. Pavelski, if anything, would somehow maybe even play better, but then maybe you lose a little bit of that production from Seguin, and then as a result, you lose the production from the second line, and it almost makes that line obsolete or not as effective. Whereas, as we've talked about before at length this season, and especially now here in the playoffs when Pavelski was injured, if you put Tyler Seguin around elite talent, he is going to match that elite talent. And so I think he has more to gain from staying alongside Robertson and Hintz. As of right now, you let those three continue to play. You let those three continue to play well together. And then you let Pavelski do his thing on the second line, where he's going to play excellently and likely elevate the game of two guys who aren't star players like Hintz and Robertson, but, can hold their own. And I think benefit from playing alongside a guy with the veteran poise and leadership of Joe Pavelski. But I'm curious to know what you, the listener, think. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments down below what you'd like to see done with the lineup. Do you think Pavelski needs to go back to the top line? Do you think that he needs to stay with Marchment, and Domi. What are your thoughts, and what do you think the coaching staff will look to do to prepare for Game 2 in order to put the Stars in the best position to win? Curious to hear your thoughts. You can also tweet at me on Twitter at Locked On Stars or at Dane_Lewis. The Dallas Stars find themselves in a similar situation in entering Game 2 as they did in the last series. They're down 0-1. They've seemingly lost home ice advantage for the time being, but they're looking to respond. This Game 2, just like the last one, is all about team response. How is the team going to come out and play after getting stunned and another overtime loss in Game 1? They absolutely have to win and tie things back up at 1 apiece before hitting the road, where really anything can happen, especially in the 2023 Stanley Cup playoffs, where it almost seems like being the road team is the advantage. I mean, we saw this very Seattle Kraken team win multiple games at Ball Arena, including Game 7 to clinch that first-round series against Colorado. We saw the Florida Panthers win a Game 7 in Boston. It's really just been all over the place. The Florida Panthers won Game 1 in Toronto in their second-round series against the Maple Leafs. Really, not many teams have struggled when they've left their home building, including the Seattle Kraken team, who had a lot of road success against Colorado and are now finding some decent road success here against the Stars. And I imagine the Stars could probably do the same thing as they won a couple of games in Minnesota, including their clinching game, Game 6, back last Friday. So anything can happen on the road, but if you're the Dallas Stars, you must absolutely get this series tied at 1 apiece. And there's so many different questions coming into this game about how the team will respond. How will Joe Pavelski follow up his 4-goal performance? How will the other players around him respond after getting kept off of the goal scoring sheet? Rope Hintz, Jason Robertson, Tyler Seguin, all held without a goal. Guys like Miro Heiskanen, who just continue to rack up insane time on ice numbers. How will he continue to hold up despite the heavy workload that has been placed upon him early in the postseason? But the biggest question in my mind about in terms of individual team response lies with Jake Oettinger. How is Jake Oettinger going to respond after allowing 4 goals in the first period and a goal in overtime that, if we're being honest, Jake Oettinger definitely should have saved and maybe been a little bit better prepared for, although maybe he just didn't see it. But you look back at that overtime goal from Yanni Gourde, and you can't help but think that Jake Oettinger absolutely has to make that save. And more often than not, that is a save that he is able to make. But many NHL experts and notable analysts have been quoted saying that they believe Jake Oettinger is now the best goalie left in the postseason. I think even when every team was still in the playoffs, there was an argument to be made that he's the best. But now, especially with Boston's goalie tandem out, Ilya Sorokin of the New York Islanders is out, Connor Hellebuck is out, it's a fair argument to be made that Jake Oettinger is the best goalie left in the postseason. And he's been drawing some pretty big comparisons, again, from some very notable NHL names. Jeff Merrick from Sportsnet, as well as former NHLer Ironman Keith Yandel, have both recently made comparisons about Jake Oettinger, comparing him to Montreal Canadiens legend Carey Price. Both of those guys, similar builds. Carey Price at 6'3", around 220 pounds. Jake Oettinger a little bit taller, 6'5", but also sitting in that 215 to 220 pound range. Both of them very big goalies, very big bodies, and can cover the crease incredibly well. But their play style and the poise and the ability that they have night in and night out between the pipes of facing really big shots, but really never letting the moment get too big for them. And they continue to just play calm, cool, and collected. I mean, that is not light praise. That is very heavy and high prestigious praise from two guys that know what they're talking about, especially Keith Yandel, a longtime NHL veteran who has gone up against some of the best goalies in the game, including Carey Price. But Jeff Merrick, who's also watched his fair share of hockey, a very, very big comparison, Jake Oettinger to Carey Price. And you really do wonder how Jake is going to lead this team in this game, because it seems like there's just so much riding on him with this, kind of title that's been placed on him as the best goalie left in the playoffs. And that's how you win playoff series. When you look at every Stanley Cup champion team, especially in recent memory, and for the most part, they've been led by their goalie. And if it's not the goalie, I mean, it's a guy that does just enough while the offense is absolutely explosive. And this Stars team has both of those. They have a guy in Jake Oettinger who can be a rock for them, but they also do a lot of nights have that offense that can give them that insurance that they need, those 3 or 4, maybe even 5 goals a game. But again, we say time and time again on this show, Locked On NHL, really anywhere that has given me a microphone and given me the opportunity to talk about this team, this is the farthest Jake Oettinger has ever gone in the postseason here in round 2. And at some point, he needs to find that next level and take that next step in order to continue to write his legacy and in order to make sure that the Stars can get as far as they want to this season. Again, a season where it is Stanley Cup Finals appearance or bust. And it was a rough outing, especially in the first period for Jake, but he really did clean his game up in that second and third period, and even the majority of overtime. I think Jake and the Stars in general, like in the same as game 1 against Minnesota, I think the Stars were the better overtime team, but just a weird bang play situation leads to the opposition getting the win. And if we've learned anything from Jake Oettinger over his brief NHL career, it's that after those games where he doesn't necessarily always look his best from start to finish, he typically follows those up with some of his best and most iconic performances. So I expect some excellence from number 29 tonight, and I personally cannot wait to see how he performs on this stage in Game 2. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you so much again for tuning in and making us your first listen every single day. Be sure to subscribe to the show here on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. You can also find us on social media at Locked On Stars on both Instagram and Twitter, as well as my personal Twitter account at Dane_Lewis. Thank you guys again for tuning in. We'll, of course, be back here tomorrow with an episode following up this Game 2 performance. But I hope you guys enjoy your Thursday. Enjoy the game. If you're going, be sure to bring the energy. Have loved what I've seen from the hometown crowd at the playoff games at the AAC so far. So I know you guys are going to continue to bring it. But I hope you guys enjoy your Thursday, enjoy the game, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.